Hollywood isn't aging anymore, and it's f***ing with women's minds.
Both aged 5 minutes.
Women don't age, they glow.
I want to age like this.
The years don't pass. Amazing.
Notice how all those comments came from millennial women. This isn't surprising. The $100 billion beauty industry has spent decades making sure women feel like aging is something terrible that they're allowing to happen if they don't fix it, with expensive products and procedures.
Let's normalize aging.
Yeah, by putting the onus on the system, not the women that have to navigate it and lose income and jobs. Let's stop the toxic positivity as long as the system makes us pay consequences for it.
Please be quiet.
A few weeks ago, I ran into this post on Instagram, and probably because I have been stewing on this topic for a while. But the thing that stood out to me the most, and that made me reconsider a lot of things that we even say within feminist circles, was that no matter what happens, our tendency to blame women for what they do, for their reasons, for their choices, even in feminism, seems to very conveniently keep forgetting that at the top of the tier, there's the patriarchy. There's white, cis, het, able, rich man. And any kind of choice that a woman makes, consciously or not, is realistically a choice that she has to make to survive within this system. As at best, second in command, and at worst, well, there's much, much worse if you're not a white, cis, het, able, rich woman. And this post was a great example of that, because along with how easy it makes to just literally compare how two different women look 20 years apart, it left me speechless that we talked about the beauty industry, we talked about surgery and the pressure of surgery, and yet the conclusions were, women, you need to stop feeling this pressure. You just need to age gracefully. You need to start doing it for yourself. Reclaim your power. And that reminded me incredibly much about the body positivity movement, which I know better for obvious reasons, which tried to do the same thing and tell people that did not have the body capital that was required of society to just love yourself.
Cat, are you fucking serious? It's not you fucking talking, it's the patriarchy!
It is me talking! You are not listening!
No, society puts things into your mind!
I don't care about society! I feel like shit!
Cat, you need to smash all beauty standards!
Shut the fuck up!
Love yourself! Love yourself! Love yourself! Love yourself! Love yourself!
Why don't you love yourself? I don't understand. Why don't you love yourself? You need to be proud of yourself and love yourself. And every time that I heard those kind of things, I was always like, it doesn't matter what I do inside my house. It doesn't matter if I fight my own demons and win over my eating disorders. I still have to open the door, and I still have to go out in the world. And the judgment that is put upon me doesn't matter how much I love myself, doesn't matter how gracefully I've aged. People that are going to make decisions about my ability of survival in the world are still going to use that criteria.
I had some applications, and the most qualified person, it was this girl who was in her early 20s. She was a little overweight. I mean, she was probably like a size 16. And she was super nice. She was willing to start the same day. And my boss comes in, sees her sitting while, you know, we just finished the interview. And I'm like, hey, give me a second. I just need him to approve this. And he comes in, takes one look at her, and he's like, what is she here for? And I was like, oh, she's the one that I'm thinking of hiring. She can start today. He's like, why would you hire her? She's fat. Like that. And I was like, I don't have anybody else who can start tomorrow, let alone somebody who's qualified and has experience. And he's like, yeah, but she's fat. She's lazy. And I remember being so upset. I was flabbergasted. That was the first time somebody was just so open about what the reason why you weren't hiring somebody was. I told him, I was like, well, then I'm gonna need you to come up with a solution because this is who I want to hire. And he's like, well, keep looking. I was like, okay, well, the store won't open tomorrow. He was like, that's fine.
And in that light, talking about women and even white, cis, able women that supposedly spend so much money and attention in trying to keep looking the same, age like fine wine, you need to always look the same. I think, ironically, that it is very sexist, even of those feminists claiming that women are doing that for vanity because they've been brainwashed by the propaganda of Hollywood. Now, there's a lot to be said about how much seeing always the same thing portrayed in media gives us the idea that that is the standard. But ultimately, claiming that women just do this out of vanity and propaganda is once again infantilizing them and saying that they do not have the ability to actually understand that they live under patriarchy. And at best, they want to look pretty. And unfortunately, a lot of feminist thought also goes along with that when we start to claim that, when we want to look pretty and wear pretty clothes and wear full-on makeup, we do it for ourselves, which, given the propaganda that we're used to as to what looks pretty, it's actually true. The problem becomes that by trying to make that a choice that we make in a vacuum, not under patriarchy that has a very clear idea of the kind of beauty that demands of women to be acceptable, we are completely ignoring that we are coerced by patriarchy to think that that is beautiful, that that is pretty, but most importantly, that if we don't provide that to patriarchy, we will not be allowed to be outside in the world with dignity and with the security of keeping ourselves alive past 35. The reason why we have one of the masterpieces of literature of all time as the Iliad by Homer is all because of a beautiful woman. Helen of Troy is the most beautiful woman alive. So beautiful that all the kings of Mycenae have to agree that whoever will win her hand, everybody else will commit to defend the husband and his property of Helen, because they know that she is so beautiful, everybody else wants her. And so they sign this contract, and when Menelaus wins her hand and marries her, and Helen becomes Helen of Sparta, every other man who wanted her has to agree to basically not be a sourpuss and actually defend the rights of the husband chosen. If that already doesn't tell you that Helen was a trophy and a property, fine, let's go more in detail about it. The beginning of the war on Troy, the last 10 years, starts because there's a royal wedding in Olympus. And at this royal wedding, all deities are invited except Eris, the goddess of discord. For obvious reason, you don't want discord at a banquet, at a party. And so Eris, absolutely in line with what she does, decides to drop a golden apple in the party. And the golden apple has the words engraved in it that says, "To the fairest of them all." A fight ensues between Athena, goddess of wisdom with the blue eyes, Hera, queen of the gods and wife to Zeus, and also goddess of weddings and marriage, so kinda get it. And then, of course, Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. They all think that they should have the golden apple because they are the fairest of them all. Zeus realized immediately that he should not get his hands involved in this, because one is his wife as well. No, let's not go there. And so they decide that a mortal should choose. And the mortal they find is Prince Paris of Troy. Now, what happens when Paris is given the power of judgment of these three goddesses is that each and every one of these goddesses, along with the request of being chosen as the fairest of them all, gives Paris an advantage, a bribe, so to speak. And so Athena promises him all the wisdom in the world, rightfully. That's her area of expertise. Hera offers him the kingdom of all Europe and Asia. You will be king of everything. And Aphrodite just offers him the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen. So interestingly, Paris does not go for wisdom and knowledge in war. Interesting, isn't it? He doesn't go for the kingdom of everything, probably because, there's also the downside of how do I maintain that? But he goes for the most beautiful woman in the world. And if you've studied the Iliad and you were ever told by your professors that that is because of love, you are a fool. And you are not looking at this from the society and system that we are still living in today. It's not just 3,000 years ago, supposedly the time that this was written about. How are you going to show that you are so wise? How are you going to wear it on your sleeve? How are you going to wear it on your sleeve, your kingdom, when it's so vast that you risk uprising and you need constant maintenance? But you know what having who is recognized as being the most beautiful woman in the world shows. You have a medal, you have a trophy, you have the kind of thing that tells two other men that you are the best one because you got what everybody desired.
Patriarchal heterosexuality can best be discussed in terms of one or another form of the traffic in women. It is the use of women as exchangeable, perhaps symbolic, property for the primary purpose of cementing the bonds of men with men.
Helen in Paris is not a love story. Helen in Paris is actually a homosocial story that tells us that the function of women under patriarchy is to speak of the value of the men who possess them. And that is also important to underline because from the beginning of time, the kind of woman that a man wants to marry and show off to others and the kind of person that men actually are attracted to are two very different things. And if you don't believe me, just look at the top lists of Pornhub and YouPorn, especially in Republican states in the US. And if you think that the Iliad is not enough of an example because it's a legend, it's a myth that is actually told to give us metaphors and values, oh, don't worry, that happened in real life as well. It's a lot of information to retain, like it's a miracle that I remember it, and then the details. Elizabeth Woodville, who became the wife of Edward IV in the 1400s, despite the fact that she had none of the required qualities of a royal wife. She wasn't high enough in nobility. Worst of all, she had already been married, was a widow, and had 2 sons. And yet, Elizabeth Woodville was widely acknowledged to be the most beautiful woman in Great Britain at the time.
Elizabeth Woodville's second marriage in 1464 to King Edward IV became a cause célèbre. Elizabeth was known for her beauty but came from minor nobility, with no great estates, and already married with 2 young sons. Elizabeth Woodville was called the most beautiful woman in the island of Britain, with heavy-lidded eyes like those of a dragon.
Edward Caesar, and against every advice and every permission that he could be given at the time, she becomes Queen Elizabeth of England. And this is a time of uprise. We are talking about the War of the Roses. Edward is one of the 3 sons of York who are fighting against the Tudor line. So there would be much more advantageous marriages that Edward could enter into to actually protect his status as king. And yet, knowing what it means to go out and about with the woman that's considered the most beautiful in the entire island, 2 other men, It's quite literally an example of Paris refusing the wisdom and the ability to win wars from Athena to go for his own kind of Helen. And far from being a matter of love, marrying a beautiful woman, it's a communication that you do to other men. Now, by all means, you will see, especially today, and especially in places like the manosphere, that men seem to be interested about everything except women, and women are actually a bit annoying, and why? Why do we still need women? And the answer is the most basic reason why patriarchy entirely exists, because it doesn't matter how much power or wealth or money men can make, they cannot procreate on their own. A tough. Now, every man that has the littlest amount of power and influence and money has to deal sooner or later with the consciousness of the fact that they will die. That's just how physics work in this world.
At the heart of our emotional nature is the profound discomfort with the knowledge that we will one day cease to exist, impermanence and finitude. Unlike other animals, humans possess a heightened awareness of mortality. This awareness creates a paradox. We have the intellectual capacity to understand our finite nature, but emotionally we find this knowledge unbearable, half animal and half symbolic. Ernest Becker, in The Denial of Death, argues that much of human behavior is driven by a need to escape the paralyzing fear of death. This fear is not something we reason through. It is something we feel deeply, viscerally, and often uncontrollably. Terror management theory, TMT, builds on Becker's insights, demonstrating how our emotional responses to death anxiety shape cultural worldviews, self-esteem, and interpersonal behaviors. According to TMT, humans create and cling to cultural systems that provide a sense of meaning, order, and immortality. These systems, whether religious, nationalistic, or ideological, are less about logical coherence and more about emotional comfort. They serve as psychological defenses, coping mechanisms, buffering us against the terror of our inevitable demise.
You can inject as much plasma of your son as you want, you will still die. And arguably, the entire reason for patriarchy and all the mess that we are currently in late-stage capitalism genuinely just comes from the death anxiety of these men and how they need to cling on to things that in their perception will give them a legacy short of actually living themselves forever. And as you can guess, lineage, a name, the entire reason why in the UK we have aristocracy that goes on the male line, so on the primogeniture of the son of the body that then takes the title and takes the entirety of the fortune of an aristocratic family, that was exactly the idea of this is how my name lives forever. I need sons. And what do I need for sons? A uterus. A uterus that walks. But if it's just a uterus that walks, what does it say about your ability and your choices and your importance as the owner of such person that also happens to carry a uterus? And arguably, all the qualities that are considered beautiful in women at any given time in history tend to go along with scarcity. And by all means, that scarcity is created, not real.
In poor countries, rich people are generally heavier than poor ones, whilst wealthy people are thinner than poor ones in countries such as America, Britain, Germany, and rich Asian countries such as South Korea. There is typically a gently downward sloping relationship between most measures of weight, like body mass index, a measure of obesity, or the share of a population that is obese, and income, as measured by wages, the share of people below a poverty line, or their income quartile.
But it still speaks to a sense of exclusivity, and therefore the access to that kind of beauty becomes rarer and therefore becomes more valuable for the man who can have that woman as a medal to show that he has conquered that rare territory. I mean, they do this with supercars as well. They just decide to make a super limited edition of 4 cars. And if you're one of the men that owns one of those 4, oh my goodness, all the other men fawn over you because you have that. Did it need to be 4? Did it need to be that? No, it's been decided arbitrarily by, guess what, men. And something that is also interesting to see is that at any given point in time, I would argue, and that's not just me, that the qualities that we refer to as beautiful in women are markers not of aesthetic beauty, but of consequences of obedience.
A cultural fixation on female thinness is not an obsession about female beauty, but an obsession about female obedience. Researchers found that prolonged and periodic caloric restriction resulted in a distinctive personality whose traits are passivity, anxiety, and emotionality. It is those traits, and not thinness for its own sake, that the dominant culture wants to create in the private sense of self of recently liberated women in order to cancel out the dangers of their liberation.
Thinness is absolutely part of that. Throughout history, the visualizations of beauty of the Venuses around the world tended to be bigger, curvier, fatter. I would argue that that's because fat is a function of estrogen, and estrogen is a function of fertility. And admittedly, yes, what patriarchy wants ultimately from women, the social category of, is children, which then also we could go into why they just want cis women, because they don't care about women, they just care about reproduction. But that's another story for another video, probably. As we move through time and patriarchy establishes itself, the politics of beauty start to show that the traits that become interesting at any given time go along with what is the rarest. So the moment that the British Empire starts to go to Africa to kidnap and sell human beings for the slave trade, and the British Empire, and especially England, becomes so much richer because of that, and they get so much more access to gold and food, suddenly, being of a bigger constitution is no longer elitist enough. You know what's elitist in a world that has abundance? Being ascetic enough to refuse the food and grow thinner and thinner.
In Great Britain, during what was known as the Long 18th Century, circa 1680 to 1815, goaded by threats to the social and moral order, philosophers, physicians, and religious leaders began to redefine what they considered appropriate behavior and appearance in English society. This led to the development of what modern scholars have described as the standards of taste. The new standards detailed the rules of etiquette, which included, among other things, ideas about how well-mannered women and men should eat, drink, and otherwise comport themselves. In this milieu, gentlefolk were increasingly encouraged to show restraint in the oral appetite. The new standards also detailed new ways of judging beauty. Beauty in the budding culture of taste was no longer merely a matter of individual impressions or mathematical proportionality. For many British philosophers, judgments of beauty required the superior faculties of the rational male mind. The codification of new principles of etiquette and the new judgments of beauty had a special impact on women, for while men and women were encouraged to adhere to the new standards of behavior, when it came to judgments of beauty, English men were seen as the arbiters of taste, or those capable of creating the guidelines for judging beauty. English women were treated as its representatives. In this way, what I am calling a new ascetic aesthetic was born. During the long 18th century, as eating and drinking less became evidence of refinement, so too did the thinner figures such behavior produced. Therefore, at the same time that gluttony and fatness were becoming associated with African women in scientific racial literature, the values of delicacy, discipline, and a slimmer physique were becoming associated with English women by the arbiters of taste and the purveyors of morality. Far from being a coincidence, the fear of being uncultivated and thus like racial and national others lay at the heart of these developments.
To the point that at the apex in the 1800s and the Gibson Girl, there were serious fertility issues in Victorian England, exactly because women, to go along with that aesthetic, started to have amenorrhea, which is exactly what happens when people become anorexic. And the moment that that level of demand, of control over women's body became actually unhealthy to the one function the patriarchy needs from women, reproduction, suddenly, we started to have the body positivity movement. In 2007, the birth rates, especially in America, started to drop. And that realistically was mostly because education started to reduce teenage pregnancies. Although along with that, the heroin chic from the 90s that still continued in the 2000s was not helping that, because again, fat is a function of estrogen. If you have legions of skinny girls with amenorrhea that cannot, therefore, get pregnant, patriarchy starts to have an issue. Not only because the individual man needs a woman to show off at the beginning at the very least, or up until she's 35 again, but also because on a larger system, especially in the way that patriarchy and capitalism collude, patriarchy needs workers, needs the next generation. Women not only need to be the model for their one man that will give them protection in exchange for being the only one that has the right to actually abuse them legally, but there's also the wider macro-social level where patriarchy under capitalism needs workers, needs people in dire straits enough whose children will not be anything more than the workers of tomorrow.
It is also relevant to notice that whilst beauty is the one capital required of women to bring to the market of patriarchy, for men it's not the same. What men are supposed to bring to the market table is wealth and power. And that is the way that patriarchy and capitalism collude, because that way patriarchy can promise men that they will get their pick of women if they work under capitalism and do the hard work to get rich and famous.
And so, from the late 2000s to I think 2011 it properly starts, the example of beauty becomes the slim thick. And you have the example in the most prominently visible women in the world who, because we deserve nothing good, were the Kardashians.
Keeping Up with the Kardashians, Maria Pramaggiore and Diane Negro wrote in 2014, may act as an infomercial for beauty products, clothing, and Kardashian spin-offs, but mainly it sells Kardashian women as sexualized signifiers of social status and high net worth. Before Kim became famous, the beauty standards of the aughts were largely defined by the kinds of physiques that could carry off what Rosalind Gill has called midriff advertising: low-slung hipster jeans and 10 inches of taut, tanned stomach. Nicole Richie's physical diminishment between seasons of the simple life led to her elevation in status from Paris's sassy sidekick to size 00 aughts fashion emblem, a frail, childlike figure whose accessories were so big they threatened to topple her. Kim's figure seemed to represent abundance and excess. The Kardashians are often touted for helping to replace skinny chic with a more substantial ideal.
I do sincerely believe that most of the legitimization given to the body positivity movement came because having more visibility through the presence of the Kardashians and their BBLs in the 2000s, where the stick, bony beauty of Paris Hilton was the example to follow. It was like that because that was unattainable. When we started to have challenges on Tumblr that demanded that girls weren't wider than an A4 page, or that if you were posting a picture of you in a bikini, you needed to have a hip bone gap, a hip bone bridge, otherwise you weren't thin enough. You needed to have a thigh gap, otherwise you fat cow. Those were by definition impossible challenges to make sure that women could never feel like beauty was attained. And then the moment that actually there is a consequence of these infertility rates, suddenly we take a breather. Suddenly, we understand that still within the limits of the impossibility of having a very, very small waist but disproportionate hips to it that you can actually only achieve with surgery, then suddenly we have something else that is still unattainable and it's actually gate-kept by money. And capitalism and patriarchy love to collude with each other. They depend on each other, along with white supremacy, which is also part of the insult of the Kardashians blackfishing, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So in that context, the BBLs and that kind of Kardashian body, which were supposedly curvier and bigger and voluptuous and possibly opening the door for the body positivity movement, was not looking like that because of the abundance and the fertility vision that was seen in the ancient idols of the Venus of Willendorf, but was seen as valuable because it determined that you needed to have access to a wealth as such that you could spend on such surgery. That did open the door to body positivity. There started to be actual plus-size model hired for the catwalks and for a Vogue issue, which by all means, plus size means non-zero in America, which is, then we can discuss about stages of fatness, but this is not the place to do that. But it started to suggest that the only valid way for a woman to work and to be seen and to be valued was not the impossible skinniness that arguably would be ebephilic. That worked for the entirety of the 2010s. That's probably the reason why we started to have books like Fear in the Black Body that discuss the racist origins of fatphobia, books that were published in Italy, which is my home country, which is probably the most fatphobic country in the world after China. Provably. And it was interesting to start seeing this discussion and the birth of fat studies in academic circles. And then, because everybody wants a BBL, there are options that start to become available not just to the elites, but to the people that cannot afford that much, but still want that marker of glamour, of power, of wealth.
For most, the signifiers of glamour need to remain tantalizingly out of reach, but this too was part of glamour. What was accessible and ostensibly available was also exclusive, but it could also be achieved, people were induced to believe, by buying commodities, which were endowed with a diluted form of magic. In my view, glamour is best seen as an alluring image that is closely related to consumption.
It's what always happens with the elites. They go and spend and invest a lot of money in something, in a status symbol, that the moment that becomes a status symbol, there starts to be cheap knockoffs. And the moment that the populace starts to have access to that, is no longer something that qualifies the owner as the elite, and so we need to go to something new, and so on and so forth.
The aristocracy may no longer have determined consumption, but it preserved a role as tastemaker, an example that carried a great cachet. But style was only glamorous to the extent that it was perceived as such by the lower urban classes. This meant that strategies of enticement were required to manipulate wants and needs, to attract interest, to promote aspirations and create rituals that made consumption satisfying. These efforts served to create contexts that endowed commodities with aura, a mystery, or an appeal that went beyond their basic essence.
The moment that Turkey started to come along with very cheap surgeries for BBLs, sooner or later we would have gotten to the point where that's no longer something that we want. And quickly enough, the Kardashians actually took out their implants, stopped playing blackfishing, had full-on white hair, proving to us that they were white women all along. What a surprise. After years of studies and testing, around the end of 2018, there start to be trials for semaglutide, also known by the names of Ozempic or glucagon-like peptide 1. And if you thought that the 2010s had finally brought fat liberation, you only need to look at what has been happening in the last 2 years with Ozempic becoming readily available for the public.
What you may not expect is that you can be more likely to get pregnant if you or your partner takes GLP-1 medications. It's a phenomenon that gave rise to Ozempic babies on social media. It's not an overstatement to say we're seeing an Ozempic baby boom, says OBGYN Deidre McIntosh, MD. It's happening for a lot of people. They've tried for years, and now they're taking these medications and getting pregnant.
Fatphobia was never actually gone. The reason was indeed fertility rates decline. And the moment that a drug like Ozempic is created, which happens to have the accidental side effect of becoming a super fertilizer to the point that if you take one of these semaglutide drugs, you are warned that you need to be conscious. It might affect your fertility. You might get pregnant even if you take a contraceptive.
If you use birth control pills, be aware that GLP-1 agonists can also affect how well those pills work. Birth control pills are absorbed by your body similar to how your body absorbs food. They need to be metabolized to work, Dr. McIntosh points out. But Ozempic and other GLP-1s work by slowing down absorption. That means your hormonal birth control pill may not be absorbed as well, leaving you vulnerable to an unintended pregnancy. The risk is highest during titration weeks, when you increase your dosage of GLP-1s. Dr. McIntosh recommends using a backup form of birth control during those weeks, such as condoms or a vaginal diaphragm, to avoid pregnancy.
Suddenly, patriarchy is no longer an issue about their legacy. And suddenly, everywhere, fat phobia becomes legitimized again. Plus-size models that were like less than 3% on the catwalks go down to less than 0.8%.
Opportunities for plus-size models in fashion are disappearing at an alarming rate. During the spring-summer 2020 season, 86 plus-size models walked runways across all 4 major cities, a tremendous improvement that accounted for 2.8% of all models. By spring-summer 2025, that had plummeted to 0.8%. The quiet retreat of high fashion and mall brands alike from offering size extensions in their clothes, citing financial concerns in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, and, of course, the rise of GLP-1s like Ozempic.
The delicious side effect that is obedience comes back on track, because what more can be demanded of a woman, where again, fat is a function of estrogen, to go against her own body and the shape that her body naturally gravitates towards and the weight that her body naturally gravitates towards, weight set point, then fighting their own genetics for the viewing pleasure and fertility needs of patriarchy. Because at this point, it doesn't matter that we have spent the last 50 years proving that BMI is faulty and actually originated simply in insurance need rather than health need. It doesn't matter that calories in, calories out is being debunked. It doesn't matter if you have a metabolic issue. You can give the patriarchy children and you can look inhumanly thin while doing it. The moment that patriarchy can demand a level of beauty that is sacrificial for women, while still getting what they need from it, which is children, there's nothing else in you that is valuable to them. For these reasons, here's my supposedly original theory. I think that no one is as well placed in the current sociocultural world as able to identify and recognize beauty than the same people who have been forced to embody it as a matter of life or death. And those people are girls. Girls have to understand beauty. They have to understand how its aesthetics evolve, because their lives quite literally depend on it. Their access to jobs and work depends on it. And under the white cis-het patriarchy, beauty is sanctioned by men and becomes currency for women. Beauty is capital.
Beauty is a currency system like the gold standard. Like any economy, it is determined by politics, and in the modern age in the West, it is the last best belief system that keeps male dominance intact. In assigning value to women in a vertical hierarchy according to a culturally imposed physical standard, it is an expression of power relations in which women must unnaturally compete for resources that men have appropriated for themselves. The beauty myth is not about women at all. It is about men's institutions and institutional power. The qualities that a given period calls beautiful in women are merely symbols of the female behavior that period considers desirable. The beauty myth is always actually prescribing behavior and not appearance. Competition between women has been made part of the myth, so that women will be divided from one another. Women's identity must be premised upon our beauty, so that we will remain vulnerable to outside approval.
Beauty is the currency that women can bring to the patriarchal market to try and survive within it. Now, I know that we could be here a long time discussing what traits are beautiful and what traits are not, and then we'll end up saying, oh, but beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And we don't need to waste time that way ideologically, because everybody has eyes to see what kind of aesthetic opens you door in patriarchal world and what doesn't. And I think that the best example for this are literally what is considered in society the pinnacle of beauty, models. Now, there is an interesting point about models, whether they are male or female. And you will notice that the entire point of beauty tends to converge in the middle of the gender expression spectrum. Male models very rarely have beards. Female models very rarely have more than a B cup. And why is that? Enter hebephilia, which is really a sanitized version of pedophilia.
Hebephilia is the strong, persistent sexual interest by adults in pubescent children who are in early adolescence, typically ages 11 to 14 and showing Tanner stages 2 to 3 of physical development. The term hebephilia is based on the Greek goddess and protector of youth Hebe, but, in ancient Greece, also referred to the time before manhood in Athens. Depending on the reference, the specific age could be 14, 16 or 18 years old. The suffix philia is derived from phil, implying love or strong friendship.
And it's serving patriarchy with that part of obedience so well that it's still going strong after millennia. Now, going back to the original post, I want to say that you would be excused if you believed it, but I don't have that patience anymore. Do better. No, there is no excuse to say women are vapid and women are brainwashed by propaganda. Because, as you will often hear me say, rather than superficially looking at a situation and describing it, I think that what defines cause and effect is indeed looking at the effects. And I don't think for 1 second that, consciously or subconsciously, women spend money in Botox, in surgery, in beauty product out of their own vanity, or because they are so inept and infantilized that they actually don't have the mind to resist any kind of propaganda from Hollywood. I think women do realize the positive and negative reinforcement that patriarchy puts on them. And I think one of the most easily recognized experiences of women is in the workplace. Even in the brief moment of respite of the 2010s, fat was never a positive trait. At best, it was urged to progressive circles to not do negative reinforcement when someone was fat. With that now gone, with the popularity of Ozempic now, we are left with all those beauty traits being demanded of women, and you can bet that that demand have a very practical, measurable effect on how they can survive because it affects their paycheck.
The upper estimates of the wage premium for a woman being thin are so significant that she might find it almost as valuable to lose weight as she would to gain additional education. The wage premium for getting a master's degree is around 18%, only 1.8 times the premium a fat woman could, in theory, earn by losing 65 pounds, roughly the amounts that a moderately obese woman of average height would have to lose to be in the medically defined normal range.
In the 1990s, Naomi Wolf, insane as she has gone now, already had highlighted that the higher in the corporate ladder a woman was, the less was the amount of calories that she would ingest.
The rare woman who makes $100,000 a year has a bodily income of 1,000 calories a day.
The importance of presenting a body that adheres to the beauty standard established by patriarchy and sanctioned by patriarchy was not only demanded of women on top of their skills and of their jobs, but along as being rewarded, would also start to become an impediment the moment that they reached 35.
It's what Sam Baker, author of The Shift, describes as the point at which women become underestimated and ignored, not because they have less to offer, but because society decides they're no longer useful. If it hasn't happened to you yet, here's a PSA. You won't write about it in your diary, because it's not the big moment you might think. It creeps in uninvited, some parts welcome, some less so, and you explain it away at first. I didn't get served for ages at the bar because the barman was chatting to his friends. Nobody let me out at the junction today because I was wearing my old hoodie and had no makeup on. Diversity has come a long way, but not enough when it comes to age. You don't turn 45 and stop wearing lipstick or deodorant or washing your face or buying or doing laundry. Let's get a brief for a 45-year-old woman in a toothpaste commercial. We skew marketing efforts towards younger women to try and entice older women. The assumption is that all women want to appear younger because we disproportionately value youth as a virtue in women. As a woman, it feels that to age is to be erased, to be slowly nudged out of a culture and relevance. That's why we fear aging, and it's why we need to create space to age and be seen as we do.
An age which is at that point defined by the beginning of changes in the aesthetic, the beginning of lines, the beginning of wrinkles, the beginning getting closer to perimenopause and then menopause, of women's body not quite responding to food the way they used to. The most concerning thing is that in groups for menopausal women, what you hear the most about the bad effects of menopause are not the osteoporosis, are not the hot flashes, are not the very dangerous health effects, are the fact that calories in, calories out doesn't work anymore, and suddenly they get fat, and that's the worst thing that can happen to a woman. And it actually is. It's actually been studied that an overweight woman might very well get a larger paycheck if she loses pounds than if she gets a master's degree education. The moment that even middle and upper class women could enter the workforce, it was immediately demanded of them that they also presented, along with their skills and capability, an aesthetic that just by being curated and adhering to the beauty standard sort of proved that they cared. Of course, such request has never been put on men.
For every feminist action, there is an equal and opposite beauty myth reaction. In the 1980s, it was evident that as women became more important, beauty too became more important. The closer women come to power, the more physical self-consciousness and sacrifice are asked of them. Beauty becomes the condition for a woman to take the next step. You are now too rich, therefore you cannot be too thin. Accustomed to viewing beauty as wealth, women are open to accepting a direct financial reward system that replaced the indirect reward system of the marriage market. The equation of beauty with money was not examined closely, and the power placebo of beauty was redefined to promise women the sort of power that money, in fact, gives men.
And I appreciate that it must have been shocking for middle-class white women to suddenly have this extra pressure on them, whilst working-class women and people of color always worked. But in the delusion of second-wave feminism, that the entire point of feminism was simply to put women in the boardrooms and actually put them at the top of the hierarchy imposed by patriarchy and not just white men, I can completely understand that their disappointment was shocked. Pikachu, shocked face, shocked. When I started my degree, I remember waking up 2 hours before lectures because I knew that I needed to have a full face of makeup, but the makeup that is not really there, the nude look makeup. And my power suits, because those were markers that would show that I was serious about how much I cared about my education and therefore afterwards about my work. When a man is called in a job interview, his skills are checked. When a woman is called into a job interview, most of the judgment on her, it's already done just by the way she looks. The kind of misogyny that suggests that a West Coast vocal fry also carries some sort of less educated, less intelligent tone, yeah, that only applies to women. Interesting, isn't it? When your literal paycheck is affected by the way you look and whether men want to have you around as an eye candy or would rather hire a woman that looks more in line with the beauty standard that they'd like to have around to just please themselves with it, well, of course, they're going to do whatever they need to do in order to survive. And the fact that we do not see the entire dependency on the beauty industry as a consequence of the very real effects that not going along with the demands of patriarchy does to women, to their career and to their ability to live independently, it's an incredible misunderstanding of the entire patriarchal system and the real life effects that it has on women. So imagine my surprise seeing this kind of post on supposedly feminist places that once again puts the fault and the responsibility of action just on women without ever considering the real life effects that not adhering to that standard will bring to them. We can tell women that they need to age gracefully all day long. The moment that they start not to wear makeup and not to use anti-aging creams and not to have surgeries, they start to be passed on for promotions. They start to lose their jobs in favor of someone younger. Patriarchy already wants women after 35 to disappear. And we are asking them, in the current system that we are, that they would pay consequences in, to stop playing the game because someone needs to stop. And curiously, the responsibility is on the ones that would pay consequences, is on the victims, not the perpetrators. And I want to clarify this, and I will invite you to go and read my full essay on the matter, which is called Cis, White and Dainty, which arguably are the three characteristics, along with young age, that fall under the umbrella of pretty. Because a lot of people, especially women with pretty privilege, then tend to come and tell me, oh, but pretty privilege is not all that it's made out to be, because, you know, I still get objectified, I still get resistance, I still never get taken seriously on my mind. I know, you know what it gets you though? Through the door. Somebody who has zero beauty capital, like me, has been at risk of homelessness twice in their life because people, especially men, could not put themselves through the sacrifice of having to meet my form in their office if they looked around. It was much better to get a prettier person there that they could look and not feel as offended by because I'm not cis, I'm not white, and I'm not dainty, than actually having my skills at their service. And it might seem that I am just being fatalist here because, oh, then if it's not down to women to stop and go against the beauty standard, whose fault is it? Who can do something? And actually, I would argue that who can do something is exactly those women that have beauty capital enough that for that brief, fleeting moment, usually between 18 and 35, actually get access to places of power. While you're there, open the doors to those that don't have your characteristics. One of the most important fundamentals of crip theory and disability rights activists is that being able is a temporary state.
Disability studies and disability movements also draw on discourses of temporality in their framings of disability. Indeed, part of the work of these movements has been to reveal non-disabled and able-bodied as temporal and temporary categories. Think here of the tab tag, temporarily able-bodied, intended to remind non-disabled people that the able-disabled distinction is neither permanent nor impermeable. Disability studies' well-rehearsed mantra, whether by illness, age, or accident, all of us will live with disability at some point in our lives, encapsulates this notion, suggesting that becoming disabled is only a matter of time.
If you're lucky, you will age and you will become disabled in some form. And so fighting for accessibility while you are still able-bodied enough to do it actually guarantees you better treatment when you will not be able anymore. And the same applies to women. If you do not fall for the Queen Bee syndrome of wanting to keep the exclusivity of what you have achieved, thinking that everything that you have achieved is your own merit, and every door that was closed in your face was because of the system, creates a fallacy. You get privileges from the system and you get resistance from the system. What is important to say is to put aside a tiny bit of your self-indulgent celebration to your own talents and understand what the power of bargain that you have in the patriarchal system is, and the moment that you get the littlest amount of access under it because you provide enough value to patriarchy to keep you around for a while, during that fleeting amount of time, Open the doors, bring in as many people that don't have your power as you possibly can, because the power is in numbers. And the moment that you've opened the door and brought those people in, the moment that you will be forgotten because there will be someone that is cisser, whiter, daintier, and younger than you, those people will be there to fight on your side. See, I'm not just here to try and come and get you pretty white women and cis and dainty. I'm actually trying to give you a map, and you can be the cicada that sings the whole summer, or you can actually invite the ants in and we will actually help you prepare for winter. What's it gonna be? Because we've been preparing all of our lives. Like, we know what it means to never even get the foot in. The littlest amount of power you have, you need to focus on sharing it from day one. Because if you think that putting all that energy in them proving yourself to be more than a pretty face, I have news for you, Buttercup. Patriarchy does not care. Patriarchy will find someone that is prettier and maybe not as bright, but that's not what is required of girls anyway. Men will be always judged on their skills, and you will always be judged first and foremost on how you look, on how white you are, how skinny you are, how cis you are, and how young you are. And while you have those characteristics that define you as pretty for patriarchy, that is the time to bring in the others. Because we will be there when you turn 36, when you turn 40, when you turn 50. Patriarchy will have forgotten about you. You have dropped out of marketing relevance at 35, other than for beauty products. So I'm not saying stop getting Botox. I'm not saying stop trying to fight with the only weapons that patriarchy has given you to claw and keep your place safe. I am saying the way to keep you safe on the long term is not by trying to simply maintain your space, is by opening the doors to those that patriarchy would never look at. Pretty much just like Troy, actually. By the way, this is simply the foundation of a much bigger essay that I am currently writing. Might become a book, we will see. But I hope that it gives you an idea of what foundation I start from and the kind of reasoning that I have to do every day to try and understand and rationalize what happens outside in the world and what actually can bring positive change. I am so tired of seeing the responsibility shifted time and time again and demands being put on people that are simply trying to still survive on patriarchy, even if they have more privilege than me. I have said it in a lot of ways, and I will keep saying it, privilege is not a dirty work as long as you use the platform that you have to represent the people that don't have that privilege, because power is in numbers. And if you have any power under patriarchy, your best chance is to create a bigger number by the time that even that privilege will be taken away from you. Thank you so much for watching. There's a bibliography down in the description below, and if you want to follow us on Patreon, there's going to be extra bits and bobs and bibliographies and reading lists and anything that comes to mind that is not a video essay, or is it not yet? Check out the Substack to find the written essays that have not become video essays yet. And I will see you in the next video.